Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with my co-host, Trent Jones.
Yo.
Yo.
Did you know my name's Robert, too?
Really?
Yeah, my first name is Robert. Yeah, I am a Robert
really?
Trent Jones. Yeah. No relation.
No shit.
No relation to the golf course guy. You know, he's got a bunch of golf courses across the state line over here in Georgia, but yeah, sorry, no relation. I suck at golf anyway, so.
So why'd you start going by your middle name?
When I was in elementary school, I remember there being like 3 or 4 other Roberts in class, and so I'm like, this is just way too many. So I just, I guess I could have been Rob, I could have been Bob.
Yeah.
No, we had another Bob, so I could have been Rob, or I could be Trent. And you don't really hear too many Trents. It's an unusual.
You're
name.
right. You're right.
Yeah.
This is a good point.
Yeah.
I was the opposite. Yeah. I had nobody else with my name where I went.
Hey, there you go. Well, I mean, dude, you just got a killer last name, Santana.
Yeah.
Like
That's
you can
what
just go by
people
your
just
last
call
name
me.
for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, just Santana. That's unbeatable.
This is true. So today we are going to talk about protein. You know, it's the first nutrient you learn about when you go into a gym, whether the person teaching you about it knows what they are talking about or not. Basically, if you're going in the weight room, somebody's going to tell you that you need to eat more protein.
Protein.
Protein. I heard one guy call it protein.
Protein. Yeah.
I was actually exposed to it in high school swimming. I don't know why. Somebody came in and was like, I'm taking whey protein powder. And I think some other guy was taking creatine. And, this was when, Mark McGuire was claiming he was on creatine when he was on andro and other steroids, probably testosterone.
Yeah. When baseball was awesome.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, that might be bad for you. So I was like afraid of creatine. Either way, like, we're doing long distance swimming, lots of miles. Neither of those supplements made a whole lot of sense. I probably should have been taking a lot more carbs, if anything, Although by the end I figured out that I was a sprinter. But even if you were a sprinter, you were putting in a lot of mileage, and it's not like your workout was different, at least at my program. I think more bigger, well-funded programs is probably more divided, especially if the team's bigger. But we all did the same thing. We were a small group of swimmers, and I remember one guy brought in the protein powder, and I remember like, oh, try this, and I would drink it after my swim practice. And then, about a week or two into that, I was like, I don't want to mix this up anymore. It smells like shit, tastes funny,
Yo, yeah.
And
dude, those early protein powders, man.
This was 2001, yeah.
And even then, I'm sure they were better than what they had, in the 70s.
Well, they had like a can, I think, back then. They had to
what isn't it like protein, like with 2 E's? Mm-hmm. The original protein powder. But yeah, I remember on the football team, there was Muscle Milk came out at some point, and that was like, we thought it was something special because it was muscle milk, right? And it had like, the list of ingredients in the back was like 6 inches long. And I remember Muscle Milk, and then I remember Inno Explode. Like all the strong guys,
yeah, that was big.
Taking Inno Explode.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that was.
I remember NO2.
Like beta alanine or something, but
it was arginine.
Arginine, okay, yeah. There's a few like citrulline, all that stuff. You find in all the pre-workouts.
What year did you graduate?
2007.
Okay, so you were
high school?
After me. I graduated. Yeah, I graduated high school in 2002. So the first NO supplement I saw was called NO2. And they had a guy in a lab coat that looked like a doctor, and I never saw that before, So I'm like, this must be legitimate. They got a doctor advertising it.
Right, well, yeah. He's wearing a lab coat.
Now we know, but...
He's probably like an optometrist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, it was like one of those infomercials, and then I think you can only get it online, which is a big deal back then. We didn't have Amazon or anything like that. I think Amazon sold books back then. And
yeah.
This was not 2002, I want to say. And then... all of a sudden, there was NOx2, and I can buy that at Vitamin Shop. And it was essentially the same shit. And I was like, well, how come the other one's more? It must be better because I have that doctor, And I couldn't get it at Vitamin Shop either. I had to get it online. So I think I tried NOx2. I forgot who made that. And then they had all those pro hormones back when those were over the counter, like VPX.
Yeah, that was wild.
You remember VPX?
I remember there was like a Tren one. It was called like Tren Extreme or something. I didn't take any of this stuff because I couldn't afford it. It was pretty expensive. And
Yeah, it was like $100 to
but
$150.
yeah, oh yeah, for like a little jar, for
Vial.
like 50 capsules or whatever. But yeah, I remember. I think what it was basically like a compound that would metabolize into like one of the metabolites of it would be like trenbolone, or so. But of course, like you have no idea what else was what else it metabolized into, and like how much tren you would be getting versus everything else. And so yeah, but that stuff is wild. You could just buy it at Walmart, sometimes.
I don't remember that one. I remember
GNC at least.
Yeah. They must have found loopholes because in 2002 it was entirely legal to buy a pro hormone, which can convert into the hormone once you ingest it.
Yeah.
And they would name them after actual steroids. So they had one that was called 1-testosterone,
right.
And that's a pro hormone for testosterone. Then they had Paradeca, and Deca is an anabolic steroid. Then they had what was the other one? There was Paradeca. There was 1-test. I don't remember. There was a few other ones. Those are the two that like jump in my mind, and they came with these little droppers, so it looked like a needle. You'd think about like a needle probably just by seeing it. It was like a little vial, a glass vial. Everything else was plastic, little glass vial liquid. Then it had a dropper taped around it, and they put it in a case, so you had to get the manager to open it up for you. And I had a couple friends that took it that were like skinny and were doing silly bullshit in the gym, and they got bigger. I mean, the stuff worked. But then in 2004, Bush issued the ban on pro hormones after the ephedra shit happened in the Major League Baseball. Those guys, the pitcher died from cardiac problems that related to ephedra, supposedly. Never mind that he was obese and dehydrated.
Was Andro? What was Andro one of those pro hormones?
I believe Andro was legal, wasn't it, in the late 90s? Yeah, that was.
Oh, it was legal.
Yeah, androstenedione. Yeah, I remember that. That was big, and then all that got banned in 2004 when they updated the Steroid Controlled Substances Act, whatever the fuck it's called. And then it was gone. I never dabbled with it, but my close friends did, and I saw it work. I just was afraid to fuck around with that stuff.
Yeah, and in hindsight, you're like, man, Lord knows what else you're getting.
Well, you don't know what else is in there
with the active compound. Yeah, if it's even clean. Yeah, if it's even a clean supplement, which probably it wasn't. But yeah, it was a wild time. And protein was right in the mix too. We joked about Celtec a while back.
Celtec was huge when I got out of high school.
Celtec, it was all the stuff that the Muscle Tech, had the marketing dollars behind it. But so for a long time, we've had this idea in the fitness community that we need to be supplementing our protein. Mm-hmm. We need lots of protein. I remember guys like Bill Kazmaier, the strongman dude's like, yeah, man, every day I eat 300 grams of protein. I try to get 500 grams of protein in every day.
Nitrotech, remember that one? That was the
Nitrotech.
That was their protein. There you go. That was their protein line.
That was
I thought it was called that. I just wanted to double check. It was Nitrotech was the protein. Celtec was the creatine.
That's fantastic. All right. So, but yeah, so we've had we've had this idea that we need lots of protein if we're going to be training seriously. And I'll tell you my practical experience with this, and I'll see if it kind of jives with the science. So my practical experience has been coaching a lot of people of different ages and demographics. My experience has been that more or less the sort of bro standard of eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight holds up pretty well as a good recommendation. Now, you do have to scale that, right? If I've got a guy in the gym who comes in and he weighs 300 pounds, I'm not going to tell him to eat 300 grams of protein.
No.
I'd probably tell him to eat 250 grams of protein. Frankly, I'd be happy if he ate 200 plus. But it doesn't scale perfectly. And the same thing on the other end, if I have a woman that comes in the gym and she's 115 pounds, I'm not going to tell her, well, I might have her eat 115 grams of protein. But if she may have a little bit smaller ratio than that 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight than a man would. But more or less, that seems to hold up pretty well. And my practical experience has been, if you are strength training in the manner that we have talked about on this show, you're actually training, you're not exercising, that if you eat sufficient protein, then you're going to maximize your gains as long as you're eating enough food otherwise, eating enough carbs, enough fat to fuel your training. If you don't eat enough protein, then you're going to have some problems. And that seems to manifest primarily in people getting random aches and pains. They might get tendonitis. They might have some joint pain. And that's what I generally see when people try to strength train in the way that we do, and they're under eating protein. So those are kind of just like some general observations that I've just gleaned from practically, just from coaching a bunch of different people. And it's been a few years since I've looked at any studies on how much protein you need, but how does that jive with the science?
The science.
The science, capital S, science.
How does that jive with the science? Well, the science states that, you only need 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's what the recommended daily allowance for protein is. Now, there's other government ranges as well, but let's put that into context. So if it's 0.8 grams per kilogram, that will be 2.2 per 2.2 pounds, right?
Right.
So that would be what?
0.36. We could round it to 0.4.
So yeah, the science says that you only need 0.8 grams per kilogram to have an adequate protein intake. Hold that thought there. So in pounds, that comes out to 0.36 grams per pound, which is a lot less than 1.0. Well, the recommended daily allowance is one range. First of all, there's another accepted range, and it even has the word accepted in it. Accepted macronutrient distribution range, which is 10 to 35% of calories, to which, is a much fairer range because now you got a range there, depending on what's going on. But if you're in that 35 percentile, if you're eating 2,000 to 3,000 calories, or, let's say 1,500 to 3,000, depending on, your calorie needs, that could be a lot higher. Maybe it could even be closer or over that 1.0, right?
Yeah. So if I take a 2,000 calorie diet and we go to the highest 35%, so the high end of that range, that would be 700 calories of protein. So if we divide by 4 to get grams, 175 grams of protein.
Yeah, so if you're 175 pounds, you're a gram per pound, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty healthy amount of protein for someone eating a 2,000 calorie diet.
But the point here is, and more importantly, since we're talking about ranges established by the science, there's no tolerable, always mess that word up, tolerable upper limit, or UL, for protein. There isn't one. There was a time where people would talk about kidney failure completely out of context because high protein intakes aren't known to cause kidney failure. Low protein intakes are recommended for people that have kidney failure already to delay getting on dialysis. That is the whole rationale for that it will accelerate already existing disease, but there is no causal relationship between the disease pathology and protein intake. So even within that argument, there are some nephrologists, which are kidney doctors, for those of you who don't know, who disagree with low protein intakes for patients with kidney disease because they are of the position, and I've worked with some of them, they are of the position that delaying dialysis is not worth it because if they end up on dialysis and are malnourished from not eating enough protein, you could have bigger problems like infection, sepsis, etc., especially since some of these people start out on a catheter, and catheters are associated with higher infection rates. So some doctors won't prescribe that. They'll say, no, eat normal amount of protein because you're probably going to end up on dialysis anyways. Delaying it and becoming malnourished is not worth it. That's their position. There's debate on that in the medical community, and I can appreciate that. But we're talking about there's two types of people that we end up working with. Most commonly you have somebody who is sedentary for most of the day, or has a lot of sedentary time, as they call it, and spend a couple hours in the gym all day to offset some of that. And, as an aside, intensity can offset lack of volume. So when it comes to light activity, that's where volume is great. You want lots and lots of light activity if you can get it in. If you can't for whatever reason, you can offset that with intensity. There's, data on that, seems to make logical sense and checks out. If you do some HIIT intervals or, you spend 30 minutes, running continuously at a pretty vigorous pace, that can offset all the time you sit on your ass at work. Anyway, that's another podcast for another day. Then you have people that, are pretty physically active in their job and, are here to take care of their joints because their back hurts, And then you have others that are in between. So I never liked when I worked in the gym business and the commercial gym business, and they would say, oh, well, you need more protein because, you're athletes. Well, no, they're not athletes. This isn't a full-time job. Maybe recreational athlete at best, I guess a power lifter could be considered an quote-unquote athlete because, you're not going to spend more than 3 or 4 hours of the day lifting weights. It's not productive, So that might be the exception to that rule. If you're a competitive power lifter or weight lifter, you're not going to spend as much time on your sport as a runner would because it's heavy, But most of the people that go into Lifetime Fitness or LA Fitness or Vasa or whatever commercial gym you are at, are not athletes. They're spending a couple hours a day doing physically demanding activity, which would be weightlifting or conditioning or a combination of the two. So the need for calories is higher. The need for essentially, all three of the macros, certainly protein and carbohydrate is higher. Need for fat is slightly higher, but probably not as much as the other two because of the nature of the activity. So, the RDA, recommended daily allowance, 0.36 grams per kilogram, is not going to cut it if you're doing physically hard shit. AMDR is probably fine for most people, at first at least. Maybe you need more. We really don't know how much protein any individual needs. We just know that more is necessary than somebody who's doing nothing for obvious reasons.
And so maybe could you give us a little background on how that RDA is derived? We don't have to go all the way down the rabbit hole, but my understanding is basically that the RDA is sort of what is sufficient to sustain life.
They're doing nitrogen balance studies that are acute, and what we're doing in the gym is chronic,
Okay, So basically they're just trying to say okay, how much protein do I have to feed this test subject until I see a positive nitrogen balance in their urine?
Or neutral,
or neutral.
Go back and,
So basically so that they're not in a catabolic state. Would that be fair to say?
Okay. Exactly.
So,
yes.
So they're not losing muscle, but that's not the same thing as eating enough to actively gain muscle mass, which is what we're doing, like skeletal muscle mass.
And that's the problem with all these studies on protein that look at these acute markers. They actually, last time I researched this, and it's been a few years, it was a pretty good study. I like the design. There's limits with all these things, but I like the way they designed it. They did all these acute measurements of protein balance, and they were looking at tracer infusions to see, arteriovenous difference, to see how much of the protein was absorbed, etc.
Yeah.
And then they did a training intervention for a few months and then looked at body composition, and they found that these acute measurements did not correlate well with the body composition changes,
Okay, yeah.
Which was not surprising to me because there's a lot of things that probably occur cumulatively over a long period of time, over repeated training sessions that progressively get harder, And the chronic effects are harder to measure because if you take somebody in and, you have them take a protein shake after their very first workout and you run a tracer in them. For those of you who don't know, a tracer is exactly how it sounds, like a little tracking device is how you want to kind of visualize it. They put in your bloodstream so they can trace how much of the protein is going in and how much of it's coming out. And that difference tells you how much stayed in and assimilated, into the muscle, to the cells. And, you can do that after workout one, but, that person's going to add, probably 100 pounds to his squat in a couple weeks, So what happens after workout 2? What happens after workout 15 or 25, right? That was always my question.
Right.
Are there adaptive effects? Do you see the same response from somebody who's lightly trained versus somebody who is untrained on day one? And they've done some of these studies on trained lifters too. But what does trained mean, right? We all know that guys have spent years in the gym doing it wrong. We know this,
Right.
That never gets addressed either.
Exactly. You could take a 10-year gym rat that's never gone through a novice linear progression because they've never actually progressed, right? It's your guy at the gym that used to bench 295 or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So okay, yeah. So there's some limitations to the research there on the chronic effects of eating protein and how much you need.
We know that calorie surplus and progressive training is likely going to add muscle. When it comes to the nutritional aspect of it, we don't really know a whole lot. in terms of, if you want to look at it through the lens of a scientific study, because you can't study these things adequately. Number one, like I said, a novice is untouched, right? So therefore, an acute measurement of protein balance or fractional synthetic rate or any other measure of protein synthesis is not going to tell us a whole lot, because people that are listening to this that have worked with us or coaches like us understand that the weight on the bar is going to go up quickly. And this is understood in the scientific literature too. They don't call it the novice effect, but they talk about how you make neuromuscular adaptations early on, and strength as measured by 5 RM, 1 RM, weight on the bar, for lack of, to make it clear, goes up very rapidly initially and eventually tapers off. And it's been acknowledged that muscle mass follows a similar curve. You tend to put it on quicker in your first year, slower in your second. Eventually you get to a point where it's immeasurable.
Right.
So,
right.
This is pretty well understood. But if you're going to do blood work and, look at a tracer study that's measuring protein synthesis, I'll just start using that word for it, because I get a lot of questions about muscle protein synthesis. And, that gives you a snapshot in time and isn't really subject to training effects, these chronic effects of training overload, right? So my best guess is the response to your first workout. So you take a guy who's been jacking off in the gym, doing a bunch of arms and chest, and then you have him do 10 sets of 10 knee extensions, you're going to see, a rise in protein breakdown, a rise in protein synthesis. The argument is you take a whey protein shake or a casein protein shake, and you're going to increase synthesis to a greater magnitude, and you're going to see that magnitude of difference be greater with the whey versus the casein, because the digestibility is greater or quicker. You digest whey faster than casein.
Sure.
So
yeah,
that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. Take whey after your workout, take casein before bed. It's a more sustained release, right? And there's applicability to that. I have a lot of clients that struggle to get protein, so I do recommend those supplements, and I have no problem with that. What I'm saying is that an acute snapshot of muscle protein synthesis as measured by these tracer studies, or sometimes they do muscle biopsies and look at proteins there, that doesn't tell you the whole picture, right? Because there's going to be repeated bouts of training with heavier and heavier weight that occur between week 0 and week 12, or week 24 would be better. 3
Sure.
months, you're just starting to gain muscle probably.
Yeah. I would think, my guess would be that over time, you take that novice from 0 to week 24, and all of a sudden they are partitioning that, those macronutrients that they're bringing in, they're putting into their body, that they're actually able to use more protein than they were on day 0. Right after protein. I'm not sure if that's true, but that would be my guess.
Well, I've actually heard that it's less. I remember reading that somewhere a long time ago, and it kind of makes sense because you're adapting, right? So a novice needs more protein than somebody who's more advanced, because a guy like you and I, we've been training a long time. Our body's used to this shit. And if there's anything we know about the human body, it will compensate to go back to homeostasis.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So a novice doing his first 3 sets of 5 squats, that's a disruption. And it's going to have a more pronounced response than, us, building up a bunch of tonnage. It takes a lot to get that novel stimulus. So most of the time, we probably don't need as much as a novice. And that's why I noticed that, I don't feel like I have to eat as much as I used to make progress,
Okay, yeah. So I've noticed that as well, that, it's kind of, and it's more like, in the past, it's been times where I've just gotten off of, tracking my macros or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's, my eating just sort of does whatever it does. And then I'll track it from time to time and be like, oh, man, I got to bring that protein up. But I have noticed over the years that, yeah, I could maybe get away on, with 150, 160 grams of protein a day. Whereas before, as a novice, I really did feel like I needed the 200.
You turn it over more efficiently.
Sure. Okay. Oh, that makes sense. Okay. So all right. So we know that we can't really rely on the ratios that we're going to get from the scientific literature, whether we're looking at the RDA or a different recommendation. But there's a practical argument that you made there that I want to go back to, and that's that. Okay. So we know that there's sort of a bottom limit or a bottom part of the range that is just what's necessary to not be in a catabolic state. But that doesn't really help us for training. On the other hand, practically, we know that there's no upper limit. So if there's no upper limit, it's probably wise to err on the side of a little too much protein.
Exactly. There's also other benefits too. But before I go into that, let me just finish my last thought.
Okay, yeah.
In these studies, when they're looking at protein turnover and protein synthesis, the most important variable that they cannot control it, is what the person is doing outside of the lab, specifically their diet. Where's the rest of their protein intake,
Yeah,
What are they eating? And getting a self-report is not going to correct that. I said this before. My colleague, your colleague, Will Morris, is a physical therapist. He's not in the diet business, but he has to ask diet questions as part of his assessment as a physical therapist. And he always says that virtually every client says, yeah, I eat chicken, broccoli, and rice, So,
right.
I mean, we all know this. The scientists know this too. They just use it because the journal won't let them publish without it. So we know self-report is junk. I saw a biostatistician 5 years ago, I want to say, spoke at a conference, and he went over all the NHANES data. For those of you who don't know, that's nationwide surveillance of body composite, various health markers, and they've been doing this for decades. And one of the things that they check is physical activity. Now they're using devices, which are better than journals, but still they have their problems. And nutrition, and nutrition is often self-reported. And the guy went through all this data. He was a biostatistician that probably gets hired to analyze the data for these types of studies, hence why he was talking about this topic, because usually most researchers don't understand stats and hire a biostatistician, which I have no problem with.
Sure.
We all have our strengths, and it's just like any other type of business. You farm out what you can't do.
Yeah.
So if anybody here is thinking about a career in academia, that is the most lucrative one, because there's not many people that do it, and they'll pay you more money for it. But anyways, I digress. I remember his famous quote, and I'll never forget it till the day that I die. And it was actually the title of one of the articles that he was on. He went over all that data and talked about how some of it wasn't physiologically plausible when you look at the calories reported versus body weight and various things. He went through all sorts of stats. But he concluded his presentation, his hour-long presentation, with, this is an example of when something is not better than nothing. Until we have a better way to measure this, we're better off not using it at all. And there's an article that he was on. He wasn't lead author. His name was David Allison, for those of you interested. He was one of the authors on this article, but the title, either he made it up or his group made it up, and he just used it at the conference. It's called Energy Balance When Something Is Not Better Than Nothing. Or I don't know if it's energy balance or measuring energy expenditure. Either way, he's right. The thing is, you get these guys that come in the lab, you run a tracer, or you look at urine, or whatever the hell you're measuring, and then you're extrapolating from that and making judgments about, their anabolic versus catabolic state, and then making recommendations on protein intake without knowing their protein intake. You don't know. You have not measured protein intake.
Yeah, unless you lock these people in a lab and you feed them everything that they put in their mouth. Yeah. We know this just simply from experience with clients, that people misreport what they eat all the time, whether they're intentionally doing it or unintentional. A lot of times it's unintentional. They just, they thought they were actually giving you exactly what they did, and that's not true.
How many times when you tracked your macros, I don't know if you were as diligent as I was, you're going to bed, you're like, oh shit, I forgot to log that bagel I had in the middle of the day.
Oh yeah, right. Or it's like, I used to work years ago when I worked in an office. Right around the corner there was a jar of M&Ms on like a little dispenser.
Oh yeah.
And you get the little cup of M&Ms, and it's like,
those are the worst.
You're on a call and you're just like, man, I just need something to get me through this. And so you walk over there and you get a little cup of M&Ms, and then you come back later, little M&Ms, and it's like, how do you track that? Like, how many did I have? I don't know. I 3 cups, but did you fill the cup every time? Like, I don't know. I just ate them. I just threw them in my gullet, and so how do you track that? So sometimes you might not even remember that you put those. You ate those at all. And if you did, you'd be like, well, I think I ate like 2 cups, and it might have been 4.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know.
It makes a difference. That could be a couple hundred calories.
And think about us. Squatting is more complicated than, weighing food. But how many times do people come over, or they hire you online, whether online or in person, and they have all these fancy Excel sheets and data that goes back months and months and months, years and years and years, and they're squatting 9 inches high.
Yeah,
right.
right.
So a diet's the same thing. You hand somebody a diet and say follow it. I don't care how well you educate and explain it verbally. If you're not there watching them and making corrections, then chances are they're not doing the program. They're not doing the diet. They're not following what they're supposed to be following. So that's why self-report's just, random number generator, in my opinion.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, that's the big thing there.
Okay. So those are the limitations of the literature we have, and I only point that out because you and I both have had arguments with people online where people trot out like the studies, like, whoa, but there's this meta study that says that like this ratio is like the optimal, and anything beyond that just doesn't work at all, and blah blah blah, right? But there are some limitations to what these studies actually tell us and how applicable they are to what we're doing, which is strength training, which is chronic.
Exactly. So
okay, so let's. I want to kind of pin you down a little bit. So what do you tell people that are new to barbell training, like when you're telling them how much protein they should eat? What are your recommendations?
I wrote an article on this, and the range that I gave, and it's typically the range that I give most people, if you're a male, you're going to need about 150 to 250 grams, depending on your size, right? Okay. A guy who's 5'2", 165, he might not need 200 grams of protein. But it's enough to where you're getting, if you're eating at least 150 or as high as 250, you're probably getting enough. You're definitely getting over the RDA.
Yeah.
You're probably in the AMDR somewhere, and you're probably getting a gram per pound of muscle mass, lean weight,
Right.
So, I'd like to give ranges. Ranges are, more reasonable. They allow more flexibility. If you're on the top end of that range and you have no problem eating 250 grams of protein, it's probably going to be fine. It's not an insane amount. Females, I typically say, anywhere from 100 to 200, somewhere in that range. And most female lifters, they'll fall somewhere between 100 and 150. I really haven't gone higher than that. But again, broad range. Protein has other benefits besides building muscle. So there's, you said something about optimal time to eat it or whatever. Is that what you were mentioning?
I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but we could talk about that, right? Like, so let's be real. So what you just said for males, 150 to 250, for females, 100 to 200.
Yeah.
For someone who is new to training, that's a lot more than what they probably have been eting. Like odds are, if they're female, they've been eating, 56 grams of protein.
Yep. Exactly.
And if they're male, they're eating 100. So that's. Yeah. So how does it matter when someone takes in these, this new range of protein?
Sure. So there's all this argument. I don't know what you said earlier, but it reminded me of this topic. This argument that, you're not going to absorb all of it. I had one professor in college.
Oh yeah. That's a popular sort of bro myth that's still going out there. It's like, well, if you eat more than X grams per meal, it's like, you're not going to absorb it anyway. So
that's bullshit. You digest and absorb 100% of what you eat, or most of it, I should say, close to it. Maybe not 100.
Unless you have diarrhea.
Exactly. The thing that gets lost is there's papers out there talking about how you're only using a percentage of it for muscle protein synthesis. So if you eat 150 grams of protein in one sitting, you're only using a percentage of it for muscle protein synthesis. That's probably true, but that is not the same thing as saying you're not absorbing it, you're not digesting it. You're just not using it to build muscle. You have other bodily proteins. Immunity is a big popular topic today, and immunoglobulins, those antibodies, those are proteins,
Yeah.
Your hair, skin, and nails are comprised of proteins. The hemoglobin that makes your blood nice and red, that's a protein, We have all sorts of different proteins other than muscle. Muscle accounts for about, I believe last time I read it, 40 to 60%, somewhere in that range. But then you still have all these other proteins that you have to synthesize. So,
yeah.
And also, again, remember, when we're talking about these studies, these are lab studies looking at a snapshot in time that aren't measuring protein intake. Does it mean that it's junk data? Not entirely, but they're not. It's not the verdict, right? They're not taking into account the chronic effects, right?
Right.
So yeah, no, there's other reasons to spread out your protein intake, eat every few hours. And one of those reasons is that it helps with blood sugar control, right? If you're diabetic or if you're trying to prevent diabetes, I think it's generally good practice to eat, 20 to 40 grams of protein every few hours, rather than eating 150, 200 grams in one meal. It helps.
I'd be impressed if you could do that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hard to do.
72-ounce steak in Amarillo, Texas, right?
Right. Yeah. That's
Yeah, so you want to just, you want to spread it out because it also keeps you fuller. Protein is the most satiating of the three macronutrients. Carbohydrate would be next. Fat is the least satiating. Or no, fat's the most satiating. Sorry. Fat's the most. Protein and fat are the most. I can't remember if protein's one or fat's one, but those two are higher. Thermic effect of food, fat is the least. So like in terms of calories expended, so calories burned digesting food, it's the opposite. Protein's the highest, carb is second, fat is third. In terms of being full, feeling full, protein I believe is the highest, then fat, then carb.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's I think you've mentioned before on the show, like if you have someone that is in a cut phase maybe, and they're having trouble with hunger towards the end of the day, like you can have them drink a protein shake with some casein in it, and that extra, and that tends to be even more long lasting, I guess, or long digesting than whey protein. But protein in general takes a while to digest, so it keeps you full for a long period of time. Yeah.
So there's useful reasons to spread your protein intake out.
Okay. Yeah.
Then I get the most popular question I get from my novices. Can I just eat 6 protein shakes a day or drink 6 protein shakes a day? And no, I don't want you doing that. There's some data out there on negative associations with, I think, bone health. I haven't read too much into it, but that's not the main reason. Protein shakes provide you with protein, but not with all of the, nutrients that are found in protein-rich foods, like iron, like zinc, B12, vitamin D, vitamin A. So, no, you need to eat most of your protein. 1 to 2 shakes a day is probably sufficient for most people. My recommendation with shakes is have one after your workout. Make sure it's whey. If you drink it in water, it doesn't taste great, but it goes down easy, especially if you have digestive issues. It tends to, because the casein or the whey component, it doesn't really irritate lactose intolerant people as much. And then, before bed, I've recommended casein if you can tolerate it, or egg white protein, which I believe digests even slower than casein. That's another good one. And then get the rest from a, combination of animal products and, all those marginal protein amounts, and non-animal products or things like legumes, tend to have a bit reasonable protein intake. I believe 8 grams along with 22 grams of carbs and a serving of beans.
Yeah,
but get it from a variety of foods.
Sure.
And that's not going to hurt you. There's no upper limit for this. So me telling you to eat a gram per pound, first of all, you're digesting all of it. You're absorbing all of it. If you're overshooting, what's the harm in that? It helps control your appetite. You're less likely to overeat. So I don't see a problem with that. The bottom line is, and this goes back to our little bro history lesson in the beginning, from the moment I started going to gyms when I was in high school, is you need more protein. Here's a protein supplement. Then you start picking up the magazines. This is what we used back then. I don't know where people get programs now. Back then it was magazines, and I'd say probably 90% of the magazine was advertisements for supplements, and then some guy with veins between his eyes, doing a bicep curl. And, back then that was like cut off jean shorts and, work boots.
And he's just peeled.
Just totally ripped and, veiny. And you get all these supplements. And even if you go into a magazine like Men's Health or Men's Fitness, it was a little bit better. You get some recipes in there, but same thing. Like, okay, you need this supplement, you need this supplement. So then all of a sudden your mind starts thinking about supplements, and you'll hear the guys talking about, oh, it's hard work. They'll give some broad statement about the training like that.
Right.
But they won't sit there and give you a long-term training plan that's going to get you where you need to go. Overload was not emphasized at all. It's like, okay, do 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 12, try to do more and do 55 arm exercises, not literally, but the training kind of took a back seat, and then it basically created a culture of gym bros and, wannabe gym bros. That I was a wannabe gym bro. I wasn't a full gym bro because I would not actually take steroids, and I wasn't naturally jacked either. So
same here.
I was a wannabe gym bro. But then you have the culture of men that are in the gym that are just buying all these supplements and walking around with a pill container and a big gallon of water and a protein shaker bottle.
Yeah.
And then, just doing arms and chest every day and not really changing much unless you're one of the guys that are taking the sauce. I had one guy, when I first started doing the LP, linear progression, 2013, he'd go in there and sumo deadlift 365 for a single. Okay. And he's like, yeah, I just got on test, but I got a really low dose of testosterone because, I don't want to max out my gains too fast. And I'm like, why the fuck are you on test, dude? You're not that strong. I'm thinking that in my head,
Right.
And I wasn't, he was doing more than me at that point in time, but I also was bought into the fact that, any guy can get to 500. I believe that, and that's what I was working towards, and I did it. So I still believe that to this day. If you're willing to put the time in, you're going to pull 500 pounds if you're a male, unless you're 75, but anyways, so, looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, this dude, because he told me, he's like, I stopped growing, I hit my limit. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, this guy was nowhere near his fucking limit. Jesus Christ,
Right.
But, he believed that he hit his limit because what that meant was the same silly bullshit's not working anymore, therefore I need drugs,
Yeah.
Then I had another guy who was a little bit more honest about it. This is when I learned that, sometimes you can't even tell if these guys are on drugs because they're fat, right?
Yeah.
This guy was a chubby guy and strong as shit, but, he told me he was honest. So he was like, yeah, I did an LP, and then I did Texas Method. And I wanted to keep linear progressing, so I just got on drugs. But anyways, where I was going with that was that there's this big emphasis on diet, right? Diet's very important for training, but there are guys that think they can diet their way to a trained body, just like there are guys who believe they can exercise their way to a trained body. The emphasis on training harder and harder and harder incrementally is lost.
Right.
It's lost in space. You either get one camp where I want to worry about my nutrient timing and getting X amount of grams of protein and making sure it's fresh food and not processed and making sure that I'm taking creatine, protein, and NO and all this other shit. And where's the emphasis on, well, I got to add weight to the bar every week, and if I missed, well, did I sleep enough? Did I eat enough? But there's no emphasis on the progressively harder and harder training, and it wasn't there back then either. They give you all these workouts, and then they sit there and say, oh, you got to change them because what did Arnold call it? The shocking principle? Or,
right,
other people call it muscle confusion.
Confusion.
Once I stumbled upon this information, I'm like, well, this makes logical sense. If you're adding more and more and more over time and you're focusing on your main lifts, you're probably going to gain muscle mass, and all that stuff about volume and tonnage and work capacity, it has its place. It's not useless. I've used that for some clients.
Sure.
And, you have to build up volume, you have to build up fatigue, and then you have to build up intensity. Most people focus on the first one because it involves light weights.
Right.
And getting
anything you can do to lift light weights and not heavier ones.
Number one, yeah, exactly. The number one priority when it comes to building muscle is what you do in the weight room and getting stronger one way or another. I don't care if you don't want to do a 1 RM. Your 3 RM better go up. Your 10 RM better go up. Your 5 RM better go up. It has to go up. If you're lifting the same amount of weight 3 years from now, you probably look exactly the same. And you know that.
Right.
You know that. You've noticed this, and you're pissed about it. I was. Yeah. But, that's my point. So protein-wise, you need more protein. And you can supplement if you're having trouble getting all, 150 to 250 or 100 to 150, 200 if you're a female.
Right.
Sure, take a protein shake. Take it after your workout. You're starving anyway. It'll help manage your appetite so you don't go eat the entire fridge if you're, a fat guy who needs to lose weight.
Right. Yeah.
And, you tend to feel better on high-protein diets. I've heard that. There's lots of benefits to them beyond, they want bigger biceps,
Yeah, I can tell you that one of my experiences is training people who are under eating protein. This is the guy who's eating 100 grams of protein while he's trying to do linear progression, or the lady that's eating 75 while she's doing linear progression, is that you tend to start seeing like random little things pop up. It's like, my shoulder hurts today. And then the next day it's like, my knee kind of hurts. And so there's no pattern, right? It's not like a chronic inflammation that's building up. Or you see tendonitis start to pop up.
Oh, yeah.
And that's really common, and it's generally the first thing I look at is like, well, how much protein are you eating every day? Because if it's not enough, then
what are your connective tissues made out of? Protein.
Yeah. Protein, right? Exactly. And so that's good. So I think of supplements, whey supplements, casein supplements, egg white, whatever you want to take, I think of those as, I don't even think of them as supplements, really. I think of creatine as a supplement. Whey to me is just food. Now, of course, it's preferable to eat, like lean meats, whole foods, right? Fish, and that's great. But you could still, like, I think of whey as just an extension of my food that I eat. Because I know there are some people who I've encountered who are like, well, I don't know, like I kind of want to be like all natural, and I don't want to I don't want to take supplements. And I'm like, well, is whey really a supplement? It's just spun down milk, more or less.
Yep.
So what kind of, maybe like before we sign off, like what are your favorite types of, you've already kind of told us, but what are your favorite types of protein supplements that you take?
I don't take any. When I typically take whey after my workout or during, and then I take casein before bed.
Okay. Yeah.
I've recommended egg white to a lot of people. I actually default to that one more because there's fewer overall digestive issues. With casein, it's a crapshoot, and I get a lot of clients for whatever reason. I think chronic dieting, fucks up your intestines. So I tend to get people that have dieted so many times and they also have intestinal issues, or they're hiring me because their intestines are fucked up for whatever reason.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know, maybe half the people that hire me can't tolerate milk products for some reason, and most of them can tolerate whey, but not casein. So I tend to say, go with the egg white protein if you have digestive issues or lactose intolerance or anything like that.
Okay. Yep. I've noticed too that like when it comes to whey, like if you just go to the store and buy a can of whey, 9 times out of 10, unless it says otherwise, it's going to be whey concentrate, and is also generally the cheaper wheys will be whey concentrate, and that's fine if you can tolerate it. Personally, I've noticed that will give me terrible gas if I have more than a scoop of that. So, but I have had for years now, I've been taking whey isolate, and my understanding is basically they essentially remove the ingredient that causes gastrointestinal distress for some people in the whey isolate, and that seems to be much more gentle on my system.
That's what I used to take, actually, whey isolate.
Yeah. It's a little bit more expensive. It's a couple dollars more per pound, but I found it to be worth it. Still pretty cheap overall. Okay, but so we've got egg white protein. What about those people out there that are vegetarian or vegan? What about those protein supplements? So you've got like hemp and rice and pea protein.
I'm sure they're all fine. I think that they fortify that with with the missing nutrients. Typically, plant-based foods are lower in, I believe it's methionine and cysteine. Those are the sulfur-containing amino acids.
Okay.
I don't remember the leucine content of all those various plant foods. Typically you would be worried about leucine because the literature. I can't talk today. Anyways, a lot of the literature on protein synthesis says that, talks about leucine because leucine's supposed to be the key regulator of protein synthesis. Yeah. And, there's probably a higher content in animal products. I don't remember offhand, but I do remember offhand, though, was when I wrote my protein article and I had to go back and brush up on my macronutrient metabolism. I was surprised to see that the sulfur-containing amino acids are actually lower in some of these plant foods than animal products. So, but I'm sure, there's differences in content in general, and I think with these vegetarian supplements, they try to fortify them with more amino acid to make up the difference.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just a challenge with these people because they're, these fake meats and, high protein plant foods are also high in fat and carbs. So if you're dealing with an overweight person that wants to lose weight, it's a giant pain in the ass to get enough protein in if they're totally vegan. Yeah.
I used to be vegetarian. I was for a few years, and I had a lot of trouble gaining lean mass, gaining weight in general. I was very underweight when I started my linear progression, and not to say it can't be done. I'm not saying that, but I certainly struggled with it. Yeah. But okay, so what about, last question here? What about BCAAs? Right, so you can take a powder that is essentially leucine, isoleucine, and valine, the three major muscle protein synthesis amino acids, supposedly. You can supplement with these separately. Would you ever recommend using BCAAs?
If you're taking a protein supplement like whey, like it's going to be in there already. And if you're eating high protein foods, they're going to be in there too.
Okay. Yeah.
All that stuff, again, it's spawned from the literature. And it matters less in practice. Like when you start looking at outcomes, like body comp changes, it makes no difference because I'd say probably 85% of that is driven by the training. And then 15% of it's diet. But obviously that 15% can destroy 100% of your progress after a certain point. So I'm not saying diet's not important. What I'm saying is if you are trying to diet your way to more muscle in the absence of progressively more difficult training, it's not going to work. I mean, you can eat 200 grams of protein and sit on your ass. You're not going to build muscle. The stimulus has to be there. And I find that to be the bigger problem than any diet variable is, the guys we get are kind of bought in already. They read the book, they understand the program, they're attracted to it, and then they're just not eating enough. That's one thing. But when you look at people in the gym in the aggregate, the majority of commercial gym members that seek out personal training to change their body composition, which whether they know it or not, that means they want to build muscle, are trying to diet their way to their body. Sure, if you have to lose weight, you're going to do most of that because you're going to lose body fat. But if you're trying to look like someone who's muscular, you can't follow a fancy diet and then sandbag the gym, the weight room specifically, and expect to look like someone who trains. You have to train. I mean, I hammer this all the time because it drives me nuts. Say, I just want to work my arms and build more arms, and I'm like, you're pressing 90 pounds.
Right. Yeah. Let's get that up to
body weight press,
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. I think that's sage advice. Stop worrying about making your diet really complicated. If you're going to spend any mental energy trying to, think about things, think about your training and how you're going to get that next PR on the bar, because that's going to net you more than trying to overcomplicate your diet. Get enough protein, get those ranges, but don't spend too much time thinking about it beyond that. It's just not worth it.
I have some rather simple advice. How about you start training, try to put weight on the bar, and then when you can't, fuck with your diet and see what happens. Because that's what I do when I coach people. I'm like, all right, well, let me see your baseline. Okay, you're telling me you're not eating enough protein. Well, we'll scale that up, to these ranges we talked about.
Yeah.
Then, you're going to squat 3 times a week, and then you're going to add 5 pounds. And wait, hold on. Week 2, why the fuck are you missing a 135-pound squat? Okay, what are you eating? Oh, 165 carbs. Well, you add another 100 to that. Then all of a sudden it starts moving again, right?
Yeah.
And then they get to about 250, and, they start missing that. All right, well, we're going to, do another push here. Let's go 350 carbs a day. And then all of a sudden they get to 315. I mean, these are just examples that I can think of offhand, but let your training guide your diet. You're not going to diet your way to the results of training. Let your training guide your diet if your goal is to build muscle. If your goal is to lose body fat, it flips. The diet's probably 85% of it. The training's about 15% of it.
Right.
But if you are trying to build muscle, then you need to get stronger. So try to get stronger by lifting weights. Try to lift heavier weights. The stimulus is the training. So if the stimulus isn't doing its job, then look at the diet. Then look at your sleep, Then look at supplements. But most of these people don't have the training down. I find that a lot of people want to exercise their way to a nice body or diet their way to a nice body, but very few actually understand and appreciate the role of training. And guess what? It ain't happening in 12 weeks. You want 20 pounds of muscle, you're signing up for about 2 years, and this is going to be your second job.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I like that. I think it's a good place to end off, man.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think we touched on a lot today, and we'll pick it up next time. So thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at Instagram, _Robert_Santana, weightsandplates.com. How about you, Trent?
Well, I realized that you kind of tricked us with that name, Weights and Plates. See, because you think it's weights and plates, what you're eating, but actually it's weights and then plates, like plates on the bar. Put another plate on your squat. Mm-hmm. And then you can come and ask your diet questions. But
Pretty
put the
much.
plate on first.
That's essentially right.
All right. So you can find me on Instagram at marmalade_cream. You can also send me an email, trent@marmaladecream.com. I was thinking about starting another Gmail account because I need another Gmail account that badly. My 11th account or whatever it is. But to do it with, just for coaching emails, just so it's not at Marmalade Cream. So people are like, mate, do you sell ice cream or something? Like, no, it's coaching. But
You're not competing with Halo Top.
no, I'm not competing with Halo Top or Skinny Cow or whatever. So. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Yep.